Hello, my name is Tracy Truax, and I am here to present my major artifact for the original contribution for ACE. What I'm sharing today is a series of lesson plans, but one primary lesson plan that I shared at a roundtable professional development conference for AP Human Geography. Um, the agenda for my part of the presentation was to talk a little bit about data, to highlight which objectives and standards the lesson actually correlates with, to introduce the preparation for the lesson. So this is why it's kind of a series of lessons rather than just a singular lesson. The outline for the lesson, and then the results of how I shifted instruction based on data um, to better accommodate my students' needs in the agricultural unit. And then linked at the end of this presentation is all of the resources that I used for this particular lesson. So to start off, at the end of every year in May, students who are enrolled in AP classes take an AP test, and teachers are actually provided the instructional planning report based on the data of their students. And I use this every year to sort of fine tune and tweak lessons or units that students struggle with. And in 2018, my students, well, they struggled with a couple different units, but agriculture was one of them. And if you look at the data, only 54% of the questions that they were asked to answer were answered correctly. So that's problematic for me. And it meant that I needed to do some kind of shift in the way that I taught the unit. So, part of the agriculture, it's one of my favorite units to teach, but part of the agriculture unit is it requires students to identify economic forces that influence agricultural practices. So essentially, they have to be able to identify and explain what the agricultural production regions of the world are and why they're located there. So it's kind of connected to both of those two learning targets that you see on the screen, explaining the connection between physical geography and agricultural practices, which sort of determines why certain agricultural practices are occurring in various places in the world. And then students also have to understand the difference between commercial versus subsistence and intensive versus extensive agriculture. This is the stuff that students just don't connect to. I work in a primarily suburban school, not a lot of connection to agriculture or anything where I live. And so, despite the fact that certain parts of this unit are really interesting, like when we talk about factory farming and where your food comes from today and how that's changed over time, students really enjoy learning about that. But this they don't really learn about. So I focused in my lesson redesign on the learning targets that I knew that students struggled with the most. And then, of course, the skill that we're working on throughout this entire lesson series is explaining how images and landscapes illustrate or relate to geographic principles, processes, and outcomes. So I sort of set this up in the same vein that you would any sort of geography class, I guess. The essential questions are: what is happening where, why is it happening there, and why should we actually care about this? And so the preparation for the application activity, the where, was a coloring page. I always tease students in geography and say that one of our core necessary materials are colored pencils, because we do stuff like this. And again, them taking the time to sort of color, this is like a color by number coloring activity. So you can see that the agricultural regions are on the right hand of the screen, and they are associated with a specific letter. So you can see that nomadic herding is J. And so they color in all of the J areas. And then that is one agricultural region. They just kind of look and find the J's. So that's sort of how the coloring page works. And then once they identify where the regions are, then we have to look at the why. And so again, this is all leading up to the application, because in this course, students have to move beyond just basic recall, and they really have to be able to apply their learning to a variety of real world situations that they haven't probably been exposed to by me in class. So it's really important that we understand like deeply the concepts so that students can apply their learning in a meaningful way. So the why is actually really important, and it correlates with that first learning target, looking at sort of the bioclimatic regions, which is the first map here, the precipitation regions, and the soil regions. And so once they identify where each of the agricultural regions are located, then they have to apply their learning of the why. So like, why is nomadic herding, for example, located in the regions of the world that are kind of the poorest soil. Well, because you can't grow crops there, but you can feed your animals from the shrubbery that grows there. And so, again, students have to, once they finish the data table, and they usually do this in collaborative groups, then they have to demonstrate their understanding of the learning target with just a couple of reflection questions. Then the what. So this is the really fun part because this unit typically falls somewhere around Valentine's Day. I have the students create a farmers only profile where they have to describe the actual practice. So they know where, they know why. Now they have to demonstrate their understanding of what. So what is pastoral nomadism? What is dairy? And so you can see that these are the instructions. And then this is the student project. So they have to detail where this is using their resources. They have to talk about the actual region itself, provide some fun or interesting facts. And then we do sort of like a speed dating exercise in class where they get to learn about all of the regions from one another. It's actually really fun. Okay, so now they have the why, the where, and the what. It's time for the application activity. So they can have all of their resources with them, and they're actually put into mixed learning level groups with the intention of sort of having my higher performing students sort of help my lower performing students. You're going to see a video of this towards the end of the presentation. But essentially, students are given 4 images. They're actually given, here, I'll start here. They're actually given 4 sets of 4 images. And these are all the agricultural regions. And so what they have to do is, as a small group, they have to decide, okay, based on just this image, based on this image, and what I learned about bioclimactic zones, what I learned about the actual agricultural regions, what I'm noticing about the image. So there's a bit of landscape analysis that they have to do in order to draw some conclusions. And they have to talk about all of this as a group. And so you can see the images vary quite a bit. And then the students have to use all their prior knowledge to make sure they really truly understand these regions. And then because, you know, the where of geography is so important, I have them guess the location because they have those coloring maps and they can use it. And some students get the regions, some really are spot on with some of the countries that they choose. And then, of course, we go over the answers. So I wanted to show you what this lesson might look like in class. This is about a minute clip of students actually working on the lesson. And the reason why I'm sharing it is because I want you to see how the students are actually using their resources, both the resources at their desks and then, of course, the farmers only projects we hang around the classroom. So these students are really using their all the tools. And yeah.
That might be really cool because like once you get to the age of 40 and less, then it gets cooler. But then I feel like that wouldn't be rice. That could be the other like the what rice is not dominant. So the other stuff like growing on those it's not good to grow all the way.
Do you think it's green?
I think it's D. Like the something like the what rice. There's a literal that would be either rice, mixed papa,
I started. Yes, there's
which one was that one?
first one I started. I was going to my pool. Yeah, I played terrible.
Yeah.
Let's go with the track. Yeah, let's go with the green. So that is H. I wanted to
And so one of the things that I realized in teaching this course is that the more access to the information they're given, the better off they are. So these students revisit these concepts quite a few times. And as a result of that, they actually learn the concepts better. And I don't know why I cannot advance the slide.
That might be really cool because like once you get to the age of 40 and less,
Fix this. Okay. So the final part of the activity requires the really thoughtful application where they're using information that they learned from previous units to draw some conclusions about not only agriculture, but also the economic geography unit and so on and so forth. So they're given 4 different scenarios, and for each scenario, they have to decide what would be the best agricultural practice based on economic information, population migration information, and then, of course, agricultural information. And that's another really important concept that students need to be able to do, which is to think through the units and use multiple units to inform their understanding of a topic. And then finally, in order to assess their learning, there's just a quiz that they take at the end of the application activity. And this is a quiz that covers multiple concepts over the course of the unit. And so it's just a way for me to do a quick. And then finally, if you look at the 2019 reports, we made a significant amount of gains in the agriculture and rural land use unit. So I'm really confident that the shift in the way that I taught sort of the hardest, least connectable part of the unit actually did impact their scores. And so we went from 54% correct to 75% correct. And I was really happy with that number. And then, of course, here are the resources. And so if they click on the resources, then they are taken to the actual resource. And then teachers are provided with ready-made lesson plans for all of the things that I shared today. And that is my roundtable lesson plan.